Very hot, very caliente. Time to get hot, caliente. Time to get very hot, hot, caliente. Very caliente. It's time to pump up the volume and live and love and laugh with Pablo, Alsina, and Jennie López. Very Caliente podcast begins now.
Very Caliente, Jennie. Woo! These shows are flying by. We're already into several months into Very Caliente podcast. She is Jennie López. I am Pablo Alsina. And today we have another wonderful author, but a man of many hats. Jennie, with an introduction, please.
We have the pleasure of being with Dr. Keith Dorsey. He was in the military with the Air Force. He climbed the corporate ladder, and then he said, you know what? I have this big passion for diversity, and now he's a strategist helping many companies to have diversity in their corporate boards. And I can't wait to learn from Dr. Keith Dorsey. We had the pleasure of meeting each other several weeks back, and we're continuing the dialogue right now. Welcome.
It's great to be here. Great to see you, Jennie and Pablo.
That's amazing. For the people who don't know you very well, can you just share a little bit of your journey from the military and then going to corporate and then saying, you know what, I'm going to build my own journey here?
You know what? Thank you, Jennie. And I have to say, this is my third chapter. My first was the Air Force for a number of years. I was stationed all around the globe. And then after that, I said, you know what, if I could have this successful career in the military, I wonder what I can do in corporate America. And so I got out, and for the next 29 years in corporate America, I worked for two companies, and that was my second chapter. I worked for a Fortune 1000 for almost 18 years and a Fortune 500 for almost 12 years. And in doing so, I became in this sales channel. I led very, very large sales teams. And so I became this turnaround specialist. I would move my family from city to city, taking over troubled sales teams. And so I ran very large sales teams, and I would lift the hood up, and I would see if they were having a people, a product, or a process issue. And then I would begin to make the necessary tweaks to turn things around. And I built a reputation over that 29-year period doing that for the Fortune 1000, then the Fortune 500 company. And then in January of 2019, I decided to enter my third chapter that I call my portfolio career of doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Things like executive advisory work. I started to also serve on corporate boards. And then I decided to go back to school, and I went back to school at the University of Southern California, and I got my doctorate in organizational change and leadership. And all my focus was on the lack of gender and ethnic diversity on corporate boards. And I took what I did in corporate America for that period of time of becoming that turnaround specialist and strategic growth expert, and I transferred those skills to my research and the wicked problem around corporate board diversity. Amazing. And I started to interview people and figure out, wow, what are those people that are getting on boards doing and the people who weren't getting on boards not doing? And I found themes. And so that brought me to where I am today, where I have this portfolio career. I serve on 5 boards, and I started my own company after my book came out, The Boardroom Journey, started my own company, helping boards think differently to get different results by bringing on differing perspectives and to help individuals do things differently to actually get on board. So I'll pause there, but that's a little bit about me.
A little bit that a lot of it loved. And I love this third chapter of your journey. You're saying now you're also an author. Can you talk to us about the boardroom journey and what kind of tidbits and information somebody who maybe is not on a boardroom, just a regular worker, a regular employee, or just a regular Joe, what they can gain from your book and your expertise?
You know, when I started to investigate boards and how people were getting on boards, and what I found out was it was a mystery. And it was a good old boys club, basically, that, you know, if you knew the right people, they'll tap you on the shoulders, they'll invite you in, and you will have this magical career after an executive career or a senior government career. where you were serving on boards. And oftentimes, if you had 3 or 4 paid boards that you were serving on, you were either matching your income as an executive or exceeding your income. And so more and more executives said, you know what, when I retire, I want to get on a board.
Right.
The problem was most were thinking about that 3 months before they retired or 6 months after they retired, where they felt like they lost their identity. They're tired of their grandchildren, and now I want to go do something else and get paid. And unfortunately, unless you were tapped on the shoulder because you knew the right people, it was really tough to get on the board at that time. And so in my research, I uncovered that the people that were getting on boards that didn't necessarily get tapped had a plan that they executed on. And some of them learned about boards from their family members at the dining room table. Others had sponsors and mentors and allies that helped them. And others were very intentional. They knew at the age of 20 what they wanted to be doing when they were in their upper 40s, 50s, and 60s. So they orchestrated their career to go that route. And that's where some of the themes that I began to uncover. And when I was writing my dissertation, I had so much information, and my dissertation chair said, Keith, you have to narrow your focus. And I said, well, I will. I won't make it about anyone who wants to get on the board. I'll make it about women who want to get on board. And she said, no, this is a dissertation. You have to narrow even more. And I said, but what do I do with all this great information that I got for people of color and women and all this? She said, write a book. And that was the impetus behind the book. I had all this great research. And in the book, I wanted to help people from all ages. So I created 4 protagonists: a 25-year-old brand new manager in a company, a 40-year-old brand new senior manager in a company, a 55-year-old executive who says she's going to retire in the next 3 to 5 years, and a 62-year-old second generation family business CEO who said that, she's going to turn the business over to her much younger brother because she's been CEO for the past 12 years. She's ready to retire. All 4 women said that at some point they want to serve on a private or a public corporate board. Well, what should you be doing at 25 in your career, at 40 in your career, at 55? And this 62-year-old CEO who's been on her own board for the past 12 years, but never served on someone else's board. What should they all be doing with their career? And so every chapter I teach the certain things in that chapter, and I give specific examples of women who have done these things in their career. And then I give the reader action steps. But I tie it all together by bringing in 2 or 4 of those protagonists so that they can see how they implemented the things that were learned in that chapter. Because how often do we sit at a seminar or read a book, we get all this great information, and we said that was cute, but we do nothing differently afterwards because we don't know how to get it from here and then out.
The execution.
And so that with the protagonist, you can learn how to execute on the things you just learned in that chapter because they're doing it.
I love that you have the 4 different protagonists, because usually you have the idea that a board is only if you retire. And if only people say, hey, Jennie, are you interested? Or Pablo, are you interested in joining? I myself also had the pleasure of being in 2 different boards and had a fabulous experience. So I'm so happy that you're empowering people to open that chapter. There's not just one way to get the door in. You have to be intentional. Now, you're the expert, right? And I know that you actually answered one of my questions about you're a man and you're focusing on women in the board. But there is a myth that the problem about not having a lot of representation is that we don't have a lot of qualified professionals out there. But you have the data, you have the tea, like my teenagers will say. Tell us a little bit, is that a myth or is that the reality? Or what's the actual reality?
Unfortunately, it's a myth. And the prerequisite for many, many years to get on a board had a lot to do with what they were asking for. They wanted former or active CEOs and former or active CFOs, chief financial officers, and they wanted them to come from the Fortune 500. Well, if you have those as the prerequisites, you're going to get mostly men in those scenarios because unfortunately, it was mostly men in those two types of leadership positions. And so what I challenge search professionals like myself and others to do in the actual boards themselves is to ask, why is that the prerequisite? And I would challenge someone that would say, Keith, find me another CEO for our board because this person's leaving. And I would say, you have 8 CEOs on your board today. Do you really need a ninth? Let's think about where you are today and where you're going. Let's analyze the skill sets of your actual board members today and the competencies of your board members. And let's think about your strategy for tomorrow. And where do you have a redundancy of skill sets and competencies? And where do you have a gap or gaps? And I found gaps around cybersecurity, gaps around talent management, gaps around risk mitigation, gaps around supply chain management. And I said, another CEO or CFO is not going to solve for those gaps. When we began to look at solving for the gaps, then you move from CEO to the people that report to the CEO to the people who report to them. And when you begin to look in those ponds, you'll find a cornucopia of women that are more than qualified for the actual position. And it's at that particular point that you get rid of that myth because you got rid of the false prerequisites that you had in place because that's the way we've always done it.
The reason you chose specifically women for your study and then for your book, that all 4 protagonists are women and not some men, some women. Can you speak on that a specific reason why you chose the women angle?
You know, when I began the research for my dissertation problem of practice was the lack of or shareholder primacy on corporate boards, really looking at the boards were only focused on one stakeholder, the shareholder, but not all the other stakeholders that they do business with, the employees, the customers, the suppliers, so on and so forth. And because of that, they were leaving a lot of people out. And it was at that point that I in my research one Saturday afternoon, Pablo, I was doing some research about shareholder primacy. 4 hours later, I lift my head up and I realized for the past 4 hours, I've been researching the lack of gender diversity on corporate boards. And I giggled. I said, am I procrastinating or am I really interested in the lack of gender on corporate boards, gender diversity on corporate boards? And I said, you know what? I was procrastinating. So it's now Saturday. I had a project that was due on Monday. Sunday, I'm behind. I start researching again. 2 hours later, I lift my head up and I've been researching the lack of people of color and ethnicity on corporate board, diversity on corporate boards. And that's when I said, you know what? I'm not procrastinating. I'm truly interested in this. And I realized there wasn't as much research out there about it that really got into the business imperative behind it. There was a lot about the moral imperative, and that's strong, but there wasn't enough about the business imperative. And that's when I said, I have the skill set that I can transfer over about working wicked problems and coming up with solutions. And I said, this is a wicked problem that I think I can make a difference on and really utilize my strengths. And that's how I ended up focusing on women and people of color. But as I continued to narrow it, I said, I really want to make a difference
I
here
love
in
that.
both, but I want to write the book about women. The funny thing is the the concepts, the frameworks, and everything that came from out of the book applies to anybody. But I wanted to
Right.
make the book specific about women to get women to parity. They represent 50% of the population, but only 30% of the board seats, or now 33% of the Fortune 500 board seats.
So for everybody who's like listening right now, there are different stages of life, career, and they had maybe that dream. Okay, at some point, I want to be considered to be at a board. You have 4 stages, and you say it applies. Doesn't matter if you're a woman or not. Can you go like, okay, protagonist one in this phase, this is one thing to focus on, and just like the bit clip of
Real
each
quick,
phase,
yeah,
so that people have an interest. Okay, I'm in this phase. This is what I can do to get ready
Jenny,
for that opportunity.
that's a great question. As a 25-year-old, you remember being that age, and when a
Like right now,
company,
right? No, I'm kidding.
yeah, absolutely, nearly. That's why you remember. And so, um, at that age, when someone sees that you're gifted and you're what they call a hypo in corporate America, a high potential individual, it feels so nice to be tapped and say, I want to promote you. And so let me get this right. You want me to do this job now. You want to pay me more, and you're interested in me to do that, for me to do that right now. Absolutely. And so many of us in our 20s and early 30s will accept a promotion just because it feels good to be wanted and they want to pay us more. What I want that 25-year-old to do right now is to think about not only where they want to go, but where they ultimately would like to be down the road. I want to introduce this concept of boards to people at a very early age. When I was in my 30s, I couldn't even spell board. I wish someone would have introduced me to boards at a much earlier age. And that's what I'm hoping for that 25-year-old protagonist to, one, learn what a board is, two, begin to orchestrate his or her career to do the right things to be most attractive to boards, and then three, start to serve on nonprofit boards today.
Good.
Okay. The 40-year-old who just became the senior manager, they now have this track and they can stay in their lane, this whole track, make great money, retire from that track. And that's what I did. I, in such a way that I lucked out. I ended up building the human capital and experience that boards were actually interested in, but I did that in a serendipitous way, and and it was luck. But if I would have known about boards and been more creative throughout my executive or senior management career, I would have moved out of that sales channel and I would have became a general manager and a president and so on and so forth to make my board journey that much more broad. Became that CEO or whatever, but my board journey is narrow. A company, a board had to be very interested in strategic growth to bring me on as a board member. Fortunately, there are enough, but my path was narrow. So as a senior manager, I say, really think about what you ultimately want. And if you have this general manager track, maybe become a head of sales to broaden it. If you have this head of sales track, maybe become a general manager to broaden it. If you're a general counsel, maybe take over a business unit before you retire as that senior manager. As that 55-year-old, think about the things that you really would like to do as a board member. And I challenge people to think about those boards, look at the board members today, analyze your strengths against theirs, and see where you have gaps. And maybe just make a few little tweaks from an education standpoint. Maybe go back and get your MBA, or from a skill set standpoint, take on a few things voluntarily in your career to just sharpen up a few gaps. And then as that 62-year-old, be intentional about what you want to do next and learn how to connect the dots so that people understand you have 12 years in this example of board experience. So that's what I would tell each protagonist.
Beautiful.
Awesome. So many stages in your life. I just want to finish this episode giving due respect to your time in service and what it meant to you. Can you speak about how the Air Force made you the human that you are, but also the eventual author, board member, and everything that is Dr. Keith?
Great question, Pablo. I have to tell you, the military is a great proving ground for any human being to get out there and learn what they are capable of. You go in, and the first thing they do in boot camp or basic training is they break you down so they can build you back up. So you go in with this cocky attitude that I can do whatever, I can do this, I can do that. And it's all about I. And by the time you're done and with even basic training, you become a we and you realize, you're better as a team than as an individual. And the transferable skills you get from that lesson and all the leadership you build. Hollywood leads you to believe military is about yelling and telling people what to do, but the military is really about leadership and meeting people where they are and helping them see where they are and where they ultimately would like to go and teach them how to do that. And that's what Hollywood doesn't tell you about the military. And to be able to have all those transferable skills that I was able to bring to corporate America was an unfair advantage. And the first day I stepped off the bus when we got to the basic training, that we all had our own little bags. And they told us when we got off the bus, 50 of us, sit your bag down. And when we sat our bags down, you heard click, 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 click. Everyone sitting their bags down. And they said, pick them up. We picked our bags up, put them down, click, 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 click. But they didn't tell us what the problem was. An hour and a half later, 1 a.m., pick them up, put them down. You heard click. Now let's go eat. And that was the first lesson stepping off the bus in the military.
That is so, so powerful. Dr. Keith, I've learned so much. I know you say, oh, this was luck and things like that, but I can see there's strategy, intentionality in all your careers. For the people who are, I'm going to ask a final question, who are thinking about, oh, this is it, maybe it's too late, this is life. I love how you approach life in chapters, right? Chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Even within chapter 3, there's different chapters. You were talking about the 60, 65-year-old. There's still 12 years, right, that they can go and start a new chapter. So tell us about one word of wisdom or one powerful insight that you want to share out there for people to live the life that they want.
I say dream big, put it out there, but most importantly, reflect. Really spend some time to try to figure out who you are and who you want to be moving forward. As many executives and just business people all together, we spend a lot of time with our companies trying to build and help the company put together a vision, mission, and value statement. We're good at helping the company figure that out. But how often have we taken the time to reflect and do a personal vision, mission, and value statement on us so that we can then understand who we are and who we would like to be, how we show up and how we would like to show up, and then begin to, with the end in mind, craft that vision, say, this is ultimately what I would want, and then reverse engineer and just execute on your plan. You will bat over 900 when you do something like that. You will get it right over 90% of the time. And when you get it wrong, fail forward fast, learn from it, and just keep moving forward. That's the advice I would give.
Love it.
That was awesome advice. Figure out who you are, who you want to be, but more importantly, Dr. Keith Dorsey said, put in the work. Also, execute. Too many times people just lay back there and the doctor, they just want to manifest. They just want to create. No. I mean, that part is nice. Having a vision is nice, but sooner or later, you have to take the steps. Right, doctor?
Absolutely. And in a serendipitous way, I say I kind of let go and I let God, and great things happen. But, you do still have to execute when you see your path. And the saying is, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react. And it's that 90% where you get to execute.
That's a beautiful ending of this episode. Yay! Dr. Keith, where can people find your book and how can people connect with you?
Excellent. Thanks for the question. You can find me on LinkedIn under Dr. Keith D. Dorsey. And so you can find me there. You can find my website, boardroomjourney.com. And you can find the book there that can point you many different locations, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, you name it. And that's what I would say. Follow me on LinkedIn. I make 3 or 4 posts a week about things that we talked about around leadership, around boards, and demystifying this whole journey.
Amazing. Well, Dr. Dorsey, it was such a pleasure to have you here on the show. Very caliente. Pablo, do you want to wrap it up?
Thank you once again to Dr. Keith Dorsey. Follow him, get his book, and look at that smile and that energy. This man is godsend. Thank you so much, Dr. Dorsey, for being with us. Jennie López rocks like always. I am Pablo Alsina, and this was Very Caliente.
Caliente.
Very hot.